Imagine loaning your own mother your car out of kindness, and getting told you're not a real success as her way of saying thanks. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Lane Avery. I'm 28, living in North Carolina, and working as a medical billing coordinator. My life isn't fancy, but I work hard and take care of myself. My family, though, has always been messy. My mom, Marla, never really believed in me. No matter what I achieved, she found a way to make it sound small. My younger brother, Troy, could get into trouble every week, and she would still call him her golden boy. When I bought my first real car, a silver Chevy Malibu, I felt proud. It wasn't new, but it was mine, paid for with my own long hours. The same day I brought it home, my mom asked to borrow it. She didn't even say congratulations, just held out her hand for the keys. I hesitated, but I still wanted to keep the peace, so I let her take it. She returned it late, brushing off my worry like it was nothing. Then she looked me straight in the eye and said I shouldn't act so serious because people like you aren't real successes anyway. Her words hit hard. Even after all these years, they still had power. Standing there, hearing my own mother talk to me like that, I felt something inside me shift. I realized all the times she had cut me down, all the times I stayed quiet to avoid conflict, all the times I tried to earn love that never came. That night, for the first time, I wondered if keeping peace with her was worth losing peace with myself. Lane had saved for years to purchase something dependable she could call her own. After signing the papers and driving away from the lot, she felt a calm pride settle in her chest. She finally had a vehicle that wouldn't break down on the way to work, something steady enough to carry her through the next chapter of her life. She parked it outside her place, still taking in the sense of accomplishment when her mother showed up the very next morning. Marla didn't greet her, didn't ask how the first drive felt. Instead, her eyes went straight to the vehicle, and she announced that she needed it for a few stops around town. Lane's stomach tightened. She wanted to protect her boundaries, especially after years of being pushed past them, so she gently asked when the car would be back and if she could refill whatever fuel she used. She tried to keep her voice steady, not wanting the conversation to escalate. Her mother immediately rolled her eyes, acting as though Lane had accused her of something serious. The moment Lane mentioned time or gas, Marla scoffed and muttered that Lane was making a fuss over nothing. She said Lane always found a way to complicate simple things, as if asking for respect was an overreaction. Lane stood there, torn between wanting to say no and wanting to avoid another argument that would last for hours. Keeping the peace felt like the safer choice, even though every part of her wanted to hold firm. With a quiet sigh, she handed over the keys. As Marla drove away, Lane felt a knot of regret settle in her chest. She had worked so hard to give herself one small piece of stability, and somehow, within minutes, it already felt like it was slipping out of her hands. The sun was already fading when Lane finally heard the tires roll into the driveway. She had been pacing for nearly an hour, checking the window every few minutes, wondering why the return time kept stretching further and further. When the engine shut off, she stepped outside, hoping for a simple explanation. Instead, a sharp mix of smoke and stale air hit her as soon as the door opened. Marla climbed out with an easy grin, as though nothing about the situation required an apology. Lane tried to ask if everything was all right, keeping her voice calm, but her mother waved her off with a dismissive chuckle. The smell clinging to the seats made Lane's stomach twist, yet Marla acted like Lane was reacting to thin air. Before Lane could finish a sentence, her mother launched into a familiar pattern. She commented on Lane's position at work with a smirk, as though it was something insignificant. She mentioned the pay without even knowing the exact amount, turning it into a joke that made Lane feel small. Then she tossed out remarks about Lane's choices, where she lived, how she handled her time, even the way she planned her future. Each line carried a sharp edge, cutting deeper than the last. Lane stood still, hands trembling slightly, trying not to let her face show anything. But the final blow came in a slow, almost careless tone. Marla tilted her head and said Lane wasn't someone achieving anything meaningful, that she was merely getting by, nothing more. The words sank instantly, stirring old memories Lane wished she had forgotten. Moments from childhood, teenage years, early adulthood, times when she tried so hard to win approval that never came. Hearing that again, in the fading light beside her own car, made something inside her ache in a way she hadn't felt in years. Lane waited until morning to look over the vehicle, hoping a night of rest would calm her nerves. But as soon as she stepped outside, her breath caught. A harsh line ran across the rear door, deep enough to catch the light in an uneven groove. She crouched down, running her fingers near it without touching. It wasn't something small. It wasn't something that could be ignored. It was the kind of mark that came from someone brushing too close to a wall or squeezing past another car without enough space. Her throat tightened as she opened the door to check inside, needing to understand what had happened. On the floor near the passenger seat lay a wrinkled slip of paper. She picked it up and unfolded it. The name of a local bar stared back at her, a place she knew well, not because she went there, but because her mother and brother often ended their nights there. The timestamp lined up with the hours she had been waiting for the vehicle to return. With the receipt in hand, she walked inside and found her mother in the kitchen. Lane tried to keep her voice level, asking what had happened. Marla didn't even turn fully toward her. She brushed off the question, claiming she had no idea what Lane was talking about. When Lane mentioned the scratch, her mother raised her eyebrows as if surprised and suggested Lane must have missed it earlier. The comment was delivered so casually, so confidently, that for a split second Lane felt a familiar old confusion tug at her. But the bar slip in her palm kept her grounded. She held it up, asking about it. Marla shrugged, saying she'd never seen it before, acting as though Lane was creating problems out of thin air. Lane could feel a cold clarity settle in her chest. The scene was too familiar, the denial, the twisting, the way blame shifted back toward her. She recognized the pattern for what it was, and the realization stung more than the mark outside. The gathering was supposed to be a calm evening, just a chance for everyone to share a meal and catch up. Lane arrived early, hoping a quiet start might keep things peaceful. She sat at the long dining table, listening to her aunt talk about work while distant laughter floated in from the other room. For a moment, Lane felt almost settled, as though the tension of the past days might ease. But the calm didn't last. As soon as everyone sat down with plates in front of them, Marla steered the conversation toward Lane in a tone that made her stomach tighten. She spoke lightly, almost cheerfully, but every remark held a sting. She described Lane as someone who tightens up over the smallest things, and said it was the reason she'd never move forward the way others did. Relatives chuckled awkwardly, unsure how to react, eyes shifting between mother and daughter. Lane tried to keep her face still, hoping the moment would pass, but then Troy chimed in. He leaned back in his chair, smirking, saying Lane couldn't handle anything without turning it into a crisis. His voice was loud enough that several people at the far end of the table looked over. Heat rose in Lane's chest, a slow burn that spread through her ribs and made her ears ring. She had endured comments like this in private for years, but hearing them thrown out casually in front of people who barely understood the family dynamic made something in her finally give way. Instead of shrinking back, she set her fork down and met both their eyes. She didn't raise her voice, didn't argue, didn't try to smooth things over. She simply refused to play the role they had always assigned her. A quiet strength settled over her, surprising even herself. For the first time, she didn't excuse their behavior. She didn't protect them. She simply stopped carrying the weight they had placed on her shoulders. After that dinner, Lane felt a shift inside her, steady, calm, and certain. She didn't make any announcements or dramatic gestures. She simply began changing the way she moved through her days. When her phone buzzed with requests for small favors, she let the messages sit instead of rushing to respond. If someone hinted about needing help with bills or rides, she replied with short, clear answers instead of searching for ways to make it work. She stopped rearranging her schedule to accommodate last-minute demands. When guilt-laden comments came her way, she didn't explain herself or try to soothe anyone's feelings. She let the discomfort sit where it belonged, with the people creating it. The space she created felt unfamiliar at first, but every quiet choice brought a little more peace. One morning, she booked an appointment to take care of the damage on her car. She went over the estimate carefully, making sure the work addressed the visible problems, nothing extra, nothing vague. The shop asked if she wanted to authorize additional fixes later. She shook her head, learning quickly that clarity protected her from blame she didn't deserve. When Marla heard about the repairs, her reaction was immediate. She confronted Lane with a storm of irritation, demanding to know why she hadn't asked for help or waited for her input. Lane listened without absorbing the anger. She simply explained that she was taking care of her own responsibilities and wouldn't be covering any other costs tied to unexplained incidents. Her mother's expression tightened, and the accusations followed. Lane was told she lacked gratitude, that she was turning cold, that she didn't understand what family was supposed to mean. The words rolled off her this time. She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She just let the moment pass, knowing she had finally chosen herself. Lane was sorting through a stack of envelopes one evening, trying to catch up on small tasks she had put off. Most of the mail was routine, nothing requiring more than a minute of attention. But one letter made her pause. It listed her name beside an account she didn't recognize, an old balance tied to a lender she had never used. Confused, she read the page again, searching for any detail that made sense. Her name appeared as a secondary contact, someone responsible if the main signer failed to keep up. That realization washed over her slowly, followed by a tight pull in her chest. She checked the dates and saw the agreement had been opened years ago, long before she began handling her own major expenses. There was only one person who could have placed her there without speaking to her first. She found her mother sitting in the living room, flipping through a magazine. Lane approached quietly, the letter folded in her hand. She asked for an explanation, keeping her tone steady, refusing to let the swirl of emotion push her into panic. She held the page out, giving Marla a chance to look it over. Her mother glanced at it briefly, then gave a light, dismissive laugh. She leaned back as though the matter was trivial, saying she had done it because Lane was reliable. She added that people who made something of themselves were expected to support the household in one way or another. The words were delivered like a compliment, as if Lane should feel flattered. A cold heaviness settled in Lane's stomach. She wasn't surprised exactly, just deeply tired. Hearing her mother frame the situation as a privilege made the breach of trust feel even sharper. Lane didn't raise her voice or argue. She simply stood there, absorbing the truth of what had been done behind her back, understanding more clearly than ever how little her boundaries had mattered. Lane knew she couldn't ignore the situation. The next morning, she took time off work and drove to a small legal office she'd passed 100 times but never needed until now. Sitting across from the attorney, she explained the strange account and how her name had been added without her agreement. The attorney listened carefully, reviewed the document, and assured her there were steps she could take to remove herself from any responsibility. Hearing that brought a quiet relief she hadn't felt in weeks. They filed the necessary forms, and Lane followed every instruction, determined to untangle herself from anything she hadn't chosen. When she walked out of the office, the air felt different, lighter, clearer. She continued the process at home, updating bank details, securing her accounts, and tightening anything that felt vulnerable. Each task felt like reclaiming another piece of her life. She didn't mention any of this to her mother. She didn't owe explanations for protecting her own stability. But word reached Marla anyway. It happened 2 days later, when Lane stopped by to drop off a package her father had mailed to the house. Before she could step back, her mother confronted her with sharp questions, demanding to know why she had gone behind her back. Lane stayed quiet, letting her mother speak. Marla's voice rose as she accused her of turning her back on the people who had raised her. She claimed Lane was acting as though she were above everyone else, throwing around terms like selfish and cold. The accusations were familiar, yet they no longer had the same power. Lane didn't argue. She simply told her mother she was taking responsibility for her own future and would no longer be tied to obligations she never agreed to. Marla's outrage filled the room, but Lane didn't let it pull her back. She walked away, steady and sure, feeling her resolve deepen with every step. Lane waited until the weekend, choosing a time when the house was quiet. She needed this to be clear, uninterrupted, and final. When Marla answered the door, she smiled politely, hiding the storm that had built inside over months of frustration and betrayal. Lane stepped in, keeping her voice calm but firm, letting the weight of what she was about to say settle in the room. "I'm done," she began, eyes locked on her mother. "I'm done being your backup plan, your wallet, your chauffeur, your emotional punching bag." The words were deliberate, each one chosen to cut through years of manipulation and excuses. She felt her hands tremble slightly, but the tremor didn't weaken her. She had practiced this in her mind countless times, and now it was real. Marla's face shifted quickly. At first, disbelief, then a sudden surge of tears, an attempt to twist the moment into guilt for Lane. "Lane, please, you don't understand," she tried, her voice breaking, reaching for pity instead of taking responsibility. Lane didn't flinch. She could feel the tension radiating from her mother, but she didn't give in. Lane took a slow breath, letting the words linger in the air between them. She could see the calculations behind Marla's eyes, the effort to regain control, but it was too late. Lane had stepped beyond the old patterns. She turned toward the door, shoulders straight, heart racing, and left before any further manipulation could begin. Walking away, she felt a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. The confrontation hadn't been loud or dramatic, but it had been final. For the first time in her life, Lane had clearly drawn a line, and this time, no one could cross it for her. The phone rang just as Lane was settling into her evening. Seeing Troy's name flash across the screen made her chest tighten for a moment, a reflex from years of chaos. When she answered, his voice immediately tore through the quiet room. He shouted, blaming her for ruining everything, insisting she had no idea how much trouble she had caused. Lane listened without interrupting, her jaw tight, feeling the familiar surge of anger and frustration rise, but this time, it didn't take over. After a minute, she ended the call and hit block. She didn't argue, she didn't respond, she simply removed the source of the noise. It felt strange at first, almost surreal, to have that boundary actually hold. For the first time, she didn't have to manage someone else's temper or excuses. She turned her attention to her car, the symbol of so many battles and compromises. Lane bought a steering wheel lock for extra security, a small but deliberate step to protect what was hers. Then she treated herself to a full detailing, wiping away layers of dirt, stains, and neglect, symbolically cleansing the years of being taken for granted and used. Each swipe of the cloth, each polish, felt like reclaiming a little more of her life. By the end of the day, a quiet stillness settled over her apartment. The tension that had followed her for so long softened. Lane realized that nothing had changed overnight in the world outside, but inside, something fundamental had shifted. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of calm, a slow, steady peace that wasn't threatened by guilt, manipulation, or chaos. It was hers, and she planned to keep it. About a month later, Lane's cousin mentioned something in passing that made her pause. Marla and Troy's car had broken down, leaving them stranded and scrambling for solutions. From what her cousin said, they had been hoping she would intervene, offer help, or somehow rescue them from the mess they had created. Lane didn't respond immediately. She let the information settle in, feeling a quiet satisfaction that had nothing to do with gloating. For years, she had carried the weight of their mistakes, constantly stepping in to smooth over problems that weren't hers. She remembered the countless late nights, the empty promises she had absorbed, and the moments she had silenced herself just to keep the peace. Now, watching them face the consequences of their own choices without lifting a finger felt like a strange liberation. Lane didn't gloat, didn't brag, didn't make a show of it. She simply acknowledged that she had finally reclaimed her time, her energy, and her boundaries. The chaos they expected her to manage was theirs alone. For once, she could watch from the sidelines, knowing that she had removed herself from the endless cycle of obligation and resentment. A deep clarity settled inside her. The most satisfying victory wasn't confrontation, revenge, or argument, It was choosing to step away and let life run its course. The universe, in a quiet way, had done what she never could, allowed them to experience the consequences while she remained untouched. Lane smiled faintly, realizing that restraint, patience, and self-respect had proven more powerful than any dramatic retaliation ever could. Lane sat on her porch one evening, the sky painted in soft shades of orange and purple. She let the silence stretch, thinking about the months that had passed and the weight she had finally lifted from her shoulders. All the moments of being dismissed, manipulated, and overlooked came into focus, but instead of feeling small, she felt a quiet strength she hadn't recognized before. She realized that every harsh word, every demand, and every betrayal had forced her to make choices she might never have considered otherwise. Boundaries she had ignored for years were now firm, her independence unquestionable. She had learned to trust herself, to prioritize her needs, and to protect her life without guilt. For the first time, she could honestly say she was stable, not just financially, but emotionally. She was no longer the person who adjusted herself to fit the expectations of others. Her confidence wasn't loud, flashy, or meant to impress anyone, it was steady, earned, and undeniable. Lane thought about her mother's words, the judgment, the constant comparisons, and felt a strange calm. None of it could touch her now. Her achievements, her peace, and her freedom were hers alone. No one could diminish them. As she watched the last sliver of sun dip below the horizon, Lane smiled softly. She had broken the cycle. She had reclaimed herself. Her success didn't need validation from anyone else. It wasn't what anyone expected, and that made it even more real. It was quiet, personal, and deeply hers, and for the first time, that was enough. Hey besties! Thanks for sticking with me till the end of this emotional ride. Lane's story shows how being used and underestimated can push someone to finally take control. From lending her car to facing harsh words and betrayal, she learned to set boundaries, protect herself, and reclaim her life. Her peace and independence became her quiet victory. If this touched you, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe for more.